In the summer of 1819, the Royal Navy deployed Captain John Franklin on an Arctic expedition up Coppermine Creek in the far northern reaches of Canada into uncharted territory. It would quickly spiral into unmitigated disaster. The 22 members of the expedition were drastically under-equipped and inexperienced, and their survival hinged on the cooperation of rival groups of trading companies and First Nation peoples. Trekking across barren, hostile wastelands, navigation was almost impossible due to constant cloud coverage and magnetic deviation. Starvation and hopelessness fueled insubordination and madness, but a mutiny wouldn't get them any closer to home. For many months they slowly starved, with only inedible scraps of lichen and spare leather boots to eat. They made it as far north as the 68th latitude before Captain Franklin finally consented to turn back. Eventually, the party split into groups based on strength, with the most able plowing ahead to try and find rescue. One small group of 3 men was killed and eaten by a 4th explorer. Another group, too weak to continue, collapsed into an abandoned log cabin and waited for death. Finally, the strongest few survivors found a group of Yellowknife natives who brought them food and restored them to health. In 1822, after 3 years of hopeless wandering, they finally made it back to civilization. 11 of the 22 explorers had died. In desperation, all of Captain Franklin's expedition journals and meteorological data had been lost. They had failed to achieve their mission, wasting years and lives for nothing. Franklin, who'd failed to foresee the imminent disaster as he pressed his men forward further into endless wastes, returned to a hero's welcome in England. He was celebrated for the suffering he endured for Britain, and few cared to note that the expedition accomplished nearly nothing, and that he was largely responsible for 11 deaths. 25 years later, at the crest of a celebrated naval career, Captain John Franklin was again put at the helm of an Arctic expedition. This time, it would be the most significant Arctic exploration ever undertaken. 129 men on the 2 most advanced ships in the world, on a voyage whose unanswered questions would drive and define an entire age of exploration. For centuries, generations of explorers from the British Royal Navy sought a route over the American continent through the Arctic to Asia. By the 1840s, the distant northern recesses of the world were the last mystery left on the map, an open challenge to the admiralty of the Navy who coveted mastery of every sea. An expedition was outfitted, the culminating effort of a generation of explorers. 2 ships, HMS Terror and HMS Erebus, equipped with modern amenities like no other ship in the world, carrying a crew of 24 officers and 105 sailors, plunged into the greatest gap left on the charts of the known world. They set off from Greenland in the summer of 1845. Captain Franklin wasn't the Admiralty's first choice to helm the voyage, or the second, or the third, but he had experience in the Arctic, and he was the one who agreed to take it on. Discovery and successful navigation of the mythical Northwest Passage seemed almost within reach, and being the man to do it would make him a national hero. As the 2 ships entered Lancaster Sound on July 26th, 2 whaling ships witnessed them sail out of view. It was the last contact the crew would ever have with the outside world. Past this point, the narrative of events becomes difficult to reconstruct. They sailed through Lancaster Sound into the Barrow Strait, heading north at the Wellington Channel. They spent the late summer of 1845 circumnavigating Cornwallis Island, area largely uncharted up to that point. They sailed as far north as the 77th latitude before returning south. Every passing day grew shorter, and the crew prepared themselves for polar night, an Arctic phenomenon where the sun sets in November and does not fully rise again until late February. They returned to Beechey Island, a bleak and desolate place, and wintered there, completely beset in the ice by late September. Average temperatures dropped from 25 degrees Fahrenheit in September to -30 in February. On January 1st, a sailor named John Torrington died and was buried. 3 days later, he was joined by crewmate John Hartnell. On his grave was inscribed a biblical quotation, "Thus saith the Lord of hosts, consider your ways." A third sailor, William Brain, died 3 months later. His grave bore the inscription, "Choose ye this day whom ye will serve." The conditions were harsh, but even so, it was abnormal to lose 3 crew members in the first winter. In time, summer came, and the expedition resumed. The ships left Beechey Island and headed south down Peel Channel, which, by a stroke of luck, was unusually free of ice that year. They moved slowly, and in September were once again stuck, beset in the ice. We don't have a clear picture of what life was like on the ships at this time. Inuit accounts describe how the Terror was shifted on its side by the ice and that the crew all wintered on the Erebus. On May 28, 1847, a note was written by the leaders of the expedition, describing the progress of their journey. The note closed with the statement, "Sir John Franklin commanding the expedition. All well." The letter was placed in a cairn with instructions in 6 different languages, asking whoever might find the letter someday to return it to the British consul. On June 11th of 1847, Captain John Franklin died. We don't know why. Franklin's second-in-command, Francis Crozier, took over. The crew remained beset in the ice. The summer thaw of 1847 never came. Inuit accounts describe that the Terror became a mortuary for the crew as more men died. They waited out another winter, hoping that next year a warmer summer would free them from the ice. On April 25, 1848, the letter placed by the crew in the cairn was retrieved and updated, a fraught message scribbled into the margins. Quote, "Ships Terror and Erebus were deserted on 22nd April, 5 leagues north-northwest of this, having been beset since 12 September 1846. Sir John Franklin died on the 11th of June 1847, and the total loss by deaths in the expedition has been to this date 9 officers and 15 men. Signed, F.R.M. Crozier, Captain and Senior Officer, and start tomorrow, 26th, for Back's Fish River." End quote. It was placed back in another cairn on the bleak landscape. The crew had given up hope that the ships might be freed and decided to trek overland. It wasn't unheard of. Prior Arctic expeditions, like those of John Ross and William Perry, had lost their ships in the ice but survived by trekking to the fringes of civilization and finding rescue. But unlike those expeditions, these men were far beyond the boundaries of the known world. And for reasons they could not understand, they were suffering and dying from forces other than just cold and hunger. We don't know exactly why this expedition failed, outside of the obvious. Long before they ran out of rations, and still secure in the relative warmth of the ship, men were still dying in large numbers. Why? Their rations had been canned with lead solder that may have leaked into the food they ate. Maybe inadequate seals caused botulism. Some bodies also showed evidence of scurvy, suggesting that the 1,000 gallons of lemon juice they sailed with may have spoiled. A possible combination of lead poisoning, botulism, and a gradual onset of scurvy badly weakened the crew. Maybe they knew they were being poisoned by their food, but if they did, they had no choice but to eat it anyway. They set out overland for Back's Fish River on April 26, 1848, hundreds of frozen miles to the south. we have limited information of what followed. The crew seems to have split into separate groups, with the strongest survivors remaining together. They hunted for survival, sometimes with the help of the Inuits, and spent several years roaming the frozen wastes. The Arctic was one of the few places on Earth where Europeans peacefully coexisted with native people because they knew the indigenous population could do what they themselves couldn't, survive a relentlessly hostile environment year after year. The Inuits didn't have enough food to feed extra mouths, but they provided critical assistance to many endangered expeditions. But this time, their assistance wouldn't be enough. By this point, whatever narrative can be constructed about the expedition comes only from Inuit accounts. Captain Crozier probably died in 1849, and James Fitzjames took command of whatever was left. Fitzjames seems to have gone back north with a small group to the Erebus, and finding it free of the ice, they sailed it south to the western base of the Adelaide Peninsula. There, he died. A large group died sometime later at a point named Starvation Cove. A small group of survivors hunted seals and caribou for a little while longer. With no other option, they cannibalized the dead. Inuit reports from the summer of 1851 or 1852 describe 4 remaining survivors and a dog roaming westward. Sometime soon after, the last few survivors of Franklin's 129-man crew finally perished after more than 6 years in the Arctic. Since 1848, and for many years afterward, rescue missions wandered the Arctic reaches, desperately searching for survivors. Finding Franklin became a national obsession for the British, but the rare bit of good fortune the crew encountered years earlier, when they found the Peel Channel unfrozen in 1846, proved to be their demise. For years after, it was frozen solid, blocking any rescue attempts. The Franklin expedition's orders were to head south down the Peel Channel, but the explorers that followed them assumed that they must have been blocked by ice and decided to sail north or west instead, meaning that for years, rescue expeditions were looking for them in all the wrong places. Eventually, even the Northwest Passage itself was discovered by sailors searching for Franklin. In 1853, a seasoned Arctic explorer named John Rae fostered uncommonly close relationships with the Inuits, and was able to obtain oral accounts of the fate of the crew. It is only through these accounts that history has any narrative of what became of the expedition, a narrative which has been validated by what scant evidence could be found. The first significant find in the hunt for Franklin was the graves of 3 sailors back on Beechey Island, but there was no information on the fate of the crew, only a few cryptic biblical verses. The note which was left by the leaders of the expedition describing their condition was not found until 1859, long after the last men had died. A generation of British naval officers cut their teeth on repeated searches for Franklin's lost expedition, hoping even 25 years later that survivors might still be found living somewhere among the Inuit. They never found what they were looking for. The fate of the ships wasn't known for more than a century. In 2014 and 2016, the wreckage of the Erebus and Terror were finally found, one off the southern shore of King William Island and the other in Adelaide Bay. Scraps of evidence were found over the years, and oral accounts from Inuit witnesses provide some clues, but endless questions remain. The legacy of Franklin's expedition is one of loss, horror, and a deep, timeless mystery.